Away was the ultimate millennial brand. It was buzzy, beautiful, and built for Instagram. But when the world stopped moving, so did Away. You've probably seen those sleek minimalist suitcases in every airport. They have the hard shell, they're smooth rolling, and they're always in someone's "what's in my carry-on" video. But what if I told you that behind the Instagrammable aesthetic is one of the most dramatic startup stories of the entire direct-to-consumer era? A brand that rocketed to unicorn status in just 4 years and then nearly imploded due to toxic leadership, media exposés, and a global pandemic that brought its entire category to a standstill. Today, we are diving deep into the rise and fall of Away, and I'll get into where the company sits today. This story has range. There's brilliant branding, Slack surveillance, a CEO scandal, and a product that no one really needed once the world shut down. Let's get into the social currency of Away. I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. Away launched in 2015 with a mission to make luggage cool. The founders, Jen Rubio and Steph Corey, had both worked at Warby Parker, so they really knew how to build a direct-to-consumer brand that could scale quickly. It's important to paint the scene here because 2015 was when the direct-to-consumer era was really taking off. Allbirds and Casper were founded the same year, Glossier had been founded the year prior, and countless other direct-to-consumer brands were in their infancy stages at this time too. On my Instagram, I've done a lot of coverage on this direct-to-consumer era because it still really fascinates me. It was such a unique point in time where the power of the consumer brand and industry dynamics, including Facebook and Instagram ads, work together so that these standalone brands were so powerful that they were able to grow and scale on their own without needing omni-channel distribution. Facebook advertising was cheaper than it is today, and brands could raise money easily because the venture capital markets were frothy and the US economy was booming. The initial origin story for Away, or at least the media-friendly version that the founders have shared, was that Jen was traveling and Jen's luggage broke in an airport in Switzerland. Her clothes and toiletries poured out of her suitcase and onto the airport floor. She ended up finding some straps and tape to get the suitcase functional enough to get to her next destination. After that, Jen was on the hunt for a better suitcase. Jen then reached out to Steph at this point and noticed that luggage was an afterthought in the travel space. Either it was cheap and fell apart, or it was luxury and wildly overpriced. Remember, this is when everyone was trying to build a sexier version of everyday household goods, so luggage felt like it was the ultimate stagnant category that could be overhauled with better design and millennial branding. Jen and Steph raised a $150,000 friends and family round to start the company. That was enough to hire their first industrial designer and take a blueprint of the luggage to a factory in China. Steph had worked in supply chain at Warby Parker, so she had the operational experience behind consumer products. Jen's role at Warby was on the social media side, so together they really had the perfect skill sets to launch a consumer physical product brand. In order to generate demand for their very first product, the carry-on, they relied on a tried and true marketing tactic, the pre-order. They came out with a book called The Places We Return To, and the book was sold with a gift card that was redeemable for the suitcases when they were ready to be sold a few months later. They aggressively blanketed social media with their ads, and it worked. The first carry-ons were delivered to customers in early 2016, and the carry-on was very sleek. It was priced at $225 with a built-in battery, which was novel, and it was premium pricing, but definitely not the most expensive option on the market. They were able to create instant interest because they didn't lead with their specs or materials. Like all direct-to-consumer brands of this era, they led with emotion. The idea that Away wasn't just a suitcase. It was a symbol of modern, stylish, intentional travel. They sent bags to influencers. They opened up a Instagrammable retail store. They made people want to buy luggage even if they didn't actually need it. And this was all working really well for them. Their first year of revenue shot up to $12 million, and they sold over 100,000 suitcases. And the next few years were an absolute rocket ship of growth. The brand was the epitome of cool, and seemingly everyone and your mom had an Away suitcase. By 2019, just 3 years after their initial product was in the hands of their customers, Away had raised over $150 million with a $1.4 billion valuation. They had opened 17 standalone stores, primarily on the East and West Coast and in Texas. It was really the poster child of millennial direct-to-consumer. Travel was booming, the product was strong, and the hype was real. However, other people were also noticing just how popular Away was and how well they were doing. And so there was this flood of other well-branded startup companies that entered the space in the years following Away's rise. Companies such as Base by Shay Mitchell, Monos, and July were all founded around 2018 and 2019. While Away's branding was still strong and resonating with consumers at this time, it didn't help that these other companies were also creating high-quality luggage and travel products for really the same customer segment as Away and taking away potential market share from them. And around the same time period, behind the scenes at Away, trouble was brewing within the company. In December 2019, The Verge published an explosive exposé on Away's workplace culture, and it was brutal. The piece revealed a high-pressure environment where employees were allegedly micromanaged through Slack, berated publicly, and there were harsh reprimands for not responding to messages promptly, even outside of work hours. Steph Corey, then CEO, was painted as controlling, erratic, and dismissive of employee well-being. The report went viral. Now, one of the most interesting things that I read in this article was about the company's very weird communication policies. They were very, very highly encouraged to use Slack as much as possible. And Jen's fiance, now husband, was Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, so that whole communication channel checks out. And per the Verge article, employees were not allowed to email each other, and direct messages were supposed to be used rarely and never about work, only for small requests, like asking if someone was available for lunch. And almost immediately after the article started picking up steam, Steph stepped down from the CEO role. She immediately came out with a public apology. But here's where things got very weird. Just a month later, she announced that she was returning as co-CEO, and that whiplash move sparked even more backlash. Loyal customers of the brand were confused, and employees were frustrated and didn't know what was going on. And the brand, once associated with aspirational travel, suddenly felt out of touch and chaotic. Eventually, Steph stepped down for good later on in 2020, but the damage was already done. Away had gone from a direct-to-consumer darling to a tale in millennial brand dysfunction seemingly overnight. Just as the leadership drama started to settle, though, COVID hit. And of course, when the travel industry shuts down, so does the luggage business. In 2020, Away laid off about 10% of its staff and halted all plans for international expansion and new store openings. Suddenly, their flagship product became irrelevant. No one needed a new carry-on. Away tried to expand their product range to lean into more outdoor travel options, since people were opting for more social distancing if they were even traveling to begin with. They also launched tech organizers, backpacks, and even wellness kits, but none of it hit quite like the original suitcase did. After all, the Away brand was built around movement, jet setting, stylish travel, and the romanticism of departure lounges. And during lockdown, that identity started to feel irrelevant and even a bit tone deaf. In the 5 years since the start of the pandemic, Away is of course still here. The brand has never disappeared, but the shine has faded. Jen Rubio stepped in as CEO in 2021, and the company has focused on rebuilding its culture and broadening its product line. They're leaning more into functionality and long-term utility rather than just aesthetics, but they've been unable to win back the glossy hype that once fueled their sales. One of the biggest lessons here is that when your brand is built on vibes, the moment that those vibes shift due to leadership, a scandal, or a global pandemic, your whole identity is at risk. But of course, even without the leadership issues and the global pandemic, the brand would have been struggling regardless. Once again, they had raised over $150 million and they had a $1.4 billion valuation at one point. They couldn't grow into that valuation because just like so many other direct-to-consumer companies of their time, they were overfunded for the type of business that they actually were. They aren't actually a tech company. They're a luggage company, and they really should have been funded accordingly, aka they should have taken in way less money than they actually did and focused on slower growth. Ultimately, they're relying on marketing to make their product resonate with customers. The functional utility improvements between a piece of luggage from Away and one of its top competitors is honestly hard to distinguish. And there's been a ton of pressure on the marketing front too. Since 2020, Away has employed a procession of marketing leads with now 4 different chief marketing officers over the past 5 years. Flash forward to last month, Away announced 2 pretty major updates to their company. For one, they announced that their products will now be sold on Amazon. Of course, they aren't the only direct-to-consumer company to acknowledge that the direct-to-consumer channel was no longer working for their business. After all, Glossier expanded into Sephora back in 2023, and many other brands have done the same. Honestly, it makes sense that they would start selling their products on Amazon and across various other retailers. The world has changed, and people would rather sign up to buy a suitcase from a retailer that can guarantee extensive selection and automatic 2-day shipping if you're a Prime member. And second, Jen announced that she is finally stepping down from the CEO position at Away. She was succeeded by Jessica Shinazi, a former executive at Dyson, LVMH, and Amazon, who had been president of Away since December. And as I mentioned earlier, Jen herself is married to Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, and he's a billionaire in his own right. Per the Wall Street Journal article that announced her departure from the CEO position, it mentions that Jen and Stuart are building out a luxury real estate portfolio. Jen didn't need to stay at Away for as long as she did, but I'd imagine that it was really hard to walk away from the business that she had built from the ground up, especially since it had fallen so far from what it once was. So there was always this hope that she'd be able to steer the ship back to somehow be on that track where it once was. Today, Away seems to be in their stability era. Even though they've gone through several rounds of layoffs at this point, they're still landing key partnerships to continue to spread brand awareness. In June of this year, the company announced its new title as official luggage partner of the WNBA's New York Liberty. This follows a December partnership with the F1 Academy, Formula One Group's female-only racing championship. So, what can we learn from Away? First, hype can allow you to scale quickly, but it can't protect you from internal collapse or market dynamics, especially if you raise way more capital than you actually need, because it will make it infinitely harder to grow into your very high valuation. Second, brands tied too tightly to one trend or context, like travel in a pre-COVID world, are incredibly vulnerable when that context changes. Of course, no one could have predicted the global pandemic, but it's a reminder of just how hard it is to adapt in all types of consumer physical goods categories. In my opinion, it's a lower barrier to entry for many founders to get into consumer goods, but it's also really difficult to maintain a competitive edge, and you always need to adapt to constantly changing consumer sentiment. Not to say that founders shouldn't build these types of companies, but founders should know about the common pitfalls and disadvantages of these types of companies so that they can plan accordingly and know what to look out for. And with that, that is the story of Away. All this to say, I personally own the Away carry-on, and I actually think it is a great piece of luggage. So if you see me at the airport with a shiny white Away carry-on, you can't say I didn't warn you. DM me or leave a review with your thoughts, and let me know if you want to see more of these direct-to-consumer podcast episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to Social Currency. I'm Sammi Cohen, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. I've been wanting to launch this show for so long. I can't tell you how excited I am to do this and how thrilled I am that you're actually here listening. It means the world to me. If you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast because it massively helps to support the work I do to bring the show to life. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, which is linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen. Social Currency is produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.